That's great. That's great. Well, welcome to Cedar Creek Community Church. It's good to see so many bright and smiling faces this morning. If you're new here, there's these green cards in the seat back in front of you. If you could fill one of those out, it lets us get to know you a little bit, and then just put it in that green box in the back. Mr. Greg is standing back there. He's in camouflage, so you might not see him. And if you're a regular attender here, that's also our offering basket. And if you're tuning in virtually, we have a giving button on our website that you can check out if you feel so led. If you are here and you have kids in the sanctuary and they need to get some wiggles out, the third room down the hall is our children's wiggle room. We are live streaming the service there, so if your kid needs to run around a little bit and get some energy out while tuning into the service, feel free to check that out. And speaking of children, we have 2 meetings coming up about children. Today after service at 11:30, there is a children's ministry meeting here in the sanctuary. We will be live streaming that, so if you're tuning in virtually this morning, that is available for you to watch from home. But we're going to be talking about the Sunday school and nursery programs, what procedures and practices we put into place, how you can get involved, and what volunteering looks like. And that second children's meeting is our Awana Leaders Meeting is coming up a week from today after service at 11:45. And if you want more information about that, Ryan and Nikki Rudak are here, and they can help you out with that. We are doing something a little different this year. We are going to have a Good Friday service. We haven't had one since our Friday night service was done. So, yes, we're going to be having that. That's exciting. That's on Good Friday from, I believe, 4:30 to 5:15 p.m. So we're pretty excited to offer that this year. And one last exciting thing, our annual Sportsman Banquet is coming up. We have it scheduled for April 30th at about 5 p.m. That's a Friday night, and that's a time where you get together, you have wonderful food. I think we've had pork chops and steaks, and they're as big as your head. They're huge. And you put tickets in for raffles on firearms and bows and fun packages. So check that out. More details will be coming. And with that, we have Mr. Rob.
Yes. Well, good morning, everyone. Good to be here. We are heading into spring. We really are. It's the end of February. We are not too far from spring. I heard the birds singing in a way I hadn't heard them singing all winter the other day. So that means something. Birds, somehow God gave those birds an understanding that we don't have. They know when spring is coming, and it's coming. That doesn't mean we're not going to get a lot more snow and cold, but spring is coming. We're going to get it. Here we go. We are today in the middle of a series that we started here a few weeks ago, and it's called Swimming in the Cultural Sea. And what we're talking about here is recognizing that we live in a culture. And by culture, what we mean is a series, a set of ideas and perceptions and expectations that drive our choices and our actions. In other words, we think certain things are true, we think certain things are important, we kind of want and expect certain things, and that set of thoughts, that set of ideas, then drives our choices, our actions. We respond in life to what we think is true, what we think is important, what we want to get happen. That's just the way that all of us are. And we live in that culture. We live in a world that has ideas. This is true. This is important. This is what we expect out of life. We all live in that culture. And that culture is like an ocean. And that's kind of the analogy we're drawing here. It's kind of like an ocean that we live in. And because we live in it, because we swim in it, because we're just part of it all day, every day, it affects us. It impacts us. Ocean currents move the things in the ocean, and they're pushed along. Waves in the ocean can flip things around. Even the composition of the ocean, a fish or a plant that lives in the ocean has to deal with the salt water, and it's different than fresh water. So everything in the ocean is impacted by the ocean. Well, you and I live in a culture. We live in a world of ideas, and it impacts us. It shapes us, it moves us, it directs us sometimes. And so you and I are impacted by this culture, by this ocean of culture that we live in. Now, that's not necessarily bad, because culture isn't necessarily bad except for this. The world we live in, our culture, the set of ideas that you and I, humans, have, it's been tainted. It's been poisoned by sin. God created a perfect world, and we, all of us humans, have sinned. We rejected God. By rejecting God, we rejected much of God's truth. And so our ideas, what we believe to be true, has been poisoned. It's been tainted. What we believe to be important, God says certain things are important. He's set up priorities. When we rejected God, sin is a rejection of God. When we rejected God, our ideas, our priorities got turned upside down. Our expectations of what life is going to be and what we desire got shifted and marred. The culture, the set of ideas that we live in as humans, it was poisoned by sin. And it is poisoned by sin. So what we think is true, what we believe, what we expect, what we think is important, it's been poisoned. And because of that, there is danger. We are this culture that we live in is filled with danger, just like an ocean. There's sharks and there's things that can kill you. This culture that you and I live in, because of sin, it's poisoned, it's twisted, it's not right, and therefore it's filled with danger. Because if culture is, I respond to what I believe, right? That's what we're saying culture is. I think certain things are true, therefore I take certain actions. Well, if what I think is wrong, my actions are going to be wrong, to my harm, to my detriment. Does that make sense? That's why this is important, because culture, what you believe, drives your choices and your actions. And if you're believing something wrong, and if you're acting wrong, it's going to take you to a place you don't want to go. But the whole point of this series is God says He understands that. God knows that that's true, and so He says this to us, and this is the verse that we're kind of camping on a lot, or jumping off of, if you will. This is in Romans 12, chapter 2. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect word. Do not conform. Don't just be like this poisoned culture. Instead, be transformed by what? The renewing of your mind. Think differently. What does God say is true? The world, our culture might say that this is true, this is important, this is what you expect, but God might say no. This is true, this is important, this is what you should expect. Grasp onto that, and when you do, what will happen? Well, you'll test and approve what God's will is. Our choices and our actions will begin to be good. Does that make sense? That's the opportunity that we as Christians have. As Christians, we still live in this poisoned world. We still live in this world that is dominated by sin. We still live in this dangerous world. God didn't take us out of it when we accepted Him. Here's what He did do. He put His Spirit inside of us so that we could begin to think differently. So we have the opportunity, you and I, if you have accepted Christ as your Savior, God says that has changed you. You have been born again. And God's Spirit lives inside of you. Because that, you have the opportunity to be different in this world. To have strength to stand against the dangers. To have the wisdom and understanding to make different, better choices. You have the opportunity to do that. And I would add that you and I as Christians have the obligation to do that. God says, do not conform. Instead, be transformed. These are directive words. We have the opportunity and obligation to be different. So that's what this series is all about. We're taking a series of topics and saying this is what our culture says is true about these topics. Here's the set of ideas. Here's what the culture says is true. Here's what the culture says is important. And here's what the culture says you should expect about these topics. Therefore, here are the choices you should make. But then we're looking at, well, is that accurate? Or is God giving us something else? And we've had two of those topics so far. We talked about sex 2 weeks ago, and Matt talked about gender last week. Today, we're going to talk about family. All right? Today we're going to talk about family and look at it from that standpoint. What does the world tell us? What are the dangers in the world's cultural mindset about family? what are the truths? What are the protections God gives us? In other words, what are the things God says, no, this is what's true about family? And then what are the action steps? What do we do in response to that? All right, that's what we're doing. Now, we can ask the question, why family? There were many, many topics we could have chosen for this series. Why family? Well, I think a couple weeks ago we said this: the more important something is, the more sin will distort it. And the more wonderful something is, the more sin will abuse it. So if the problem with our culture is sin, if that's what is poisoning our culture, if that's what is creating these wrong ideas, well then sin will distort important things and will abuse wonderful things. Family is important and it's wonderful. And so that's why we're going to talk about it here. I'm going to spend a lot of time today way back in the book of Genesis, because God talks about family there. And really, way back in Genesis, when God talks about the creation of the world, the very, very, very first institution that He made was a family. It was before government, before the church, before any institution, God created a family. Here and we'll read a lot. We're going to keep coming back to this verse, but in Genesis 2:23, the man said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and they will become one flesh." This very, very, very first institution God made was a family. And it's interesting that first part there, the man, that's Adam, he is responding with exuberance to what God had done for him. Because if you look a little bit before that, he said, "You know what, Adam, everything's pretty good for you here, but you're missing one thing. You need help." And every woman in the world says, "Yes, my men need help." And so I'm going to make a special helper for you, Adam. And then God created some anticipation in Adam, and He brought all the animals to him. Was this the one? And God knew that none of the animals were going to be the right helper. And He did it, I think, just to build anticipation. There's something so wonderful and something so good coming. And then God made woman and Adam said, "That's it. That is it. And now she's like me, and we're going to become one." It's wonderful and it's important. That's why we're talking about family, because it's wonderful and it's important. Therefore, sin's going to distort it and it's going to abuse it. Okay? Now, one thing I want to acknowledge before we jump into the meat of this message here today, I want to acknowledge that some of the things I say today might be hard for some of us. Probably will be hard for all of us in certain ways. It's possible that it'll be hard because you just disagree with me, and I get that. I understand that. And if I say something that you disagree with, I'm very willing to talk about that with you. And it could be that this is hard because you disagree with me. I'm guessing that it might be hard for some of us, not for that reason. It might be hard for some of us because of this. I'm going to talk about family in the way that God designed it. And what can happen when you do that is all of us can look at our own families and feel the lack of that. We can look at, maybe you're not married at all. Maybe you look at your growing up and think, my family was twisted. Maybe your family structure now is not what I'm talking about at all. And as you talk about this wonderful thing, if you feel the lack of that thing, that can be very, very hard. It's kind of like if you are just hungry, you are so hungry, and you look through a window and someone is eating a wonderful dinner. All of your favorite foods, they're all there, and this person is eating them, and you can see it, but you can't have it. Feeling the lack of that makes the lack of it worse, doesn't it? Some of us, I suspect all of us, as I talk about family, are going to feel some of the lack of that, because nobody's family is exactly what God intended it to be, because we live in this sinful world. So I just want to acknowledge that. I'm going to try to deal with that some at the end. I just want to get that out up front. I'm not trying to make anyone feel bad about their family situation, because none of us have a perfect one. Some of ours are less perfect than others. God understands that. What I'm going to do here is lay out, this is what God says, and then we'll talk about, well, how do I deal with that in an imperfect world, okay? Okay, so here we go. We're going to start with, I can never make this thing work when I need to. There we go. We're going to start with the dangers. What does our culture tell us? What are the lies that our culture tells us about family, okay? What do we need to be careful of? What are we told that isn't true? Well, here's one, and there's probably many. Here's one. We are told, our culture believes that family is negotiable. In other words, what I mean by that is we can create it. We can make family to be what we want it to be. And so our culture does that a lot. Family, the traditional family is what you hear that word, traditional family, or nuclear family. It's a mom and a dad and kids. That's the composition of a family, and it's in the context of a marriage. Mom and dad get married, and they have kids. That's what a family kind of traditionally has been. Where our culture says, hey, you know what? We can modify that composition. We can create something different. And in essence, what our culture says is we can define family any way we want to. So our culture does. Same-sex marriage is a redefinition of the traditional family roles. Used to be a husband and wife. Well, we don't like that as a culture. We think that there's reasons not to do that. So instead, we're going to say it could be two men or two women. That's a redefinition. It's okay, it's kind of been this, but this is ours to create or not to create, so we're going to change the composition of it a little bit. Divorce is very much, okay, I had a marriage, but for whatever reason, it's not satisfying, it's not working, so I'm going to break that marriage and then go get another one. I'm going to remarry, perhaps many times. And what that creates is families in several households, scattered around. Kids have a mom and a dad, and then they divorce, and then there's a mom and a stepdad, and then maybe there's another break, and there's brothers and sisters and stepbrothers and sisters. Our culture has said all of those things are okay. Those are all valid definitions of family. If you're familiar with the sitcom Modern Family, you guys familiar with that? It's Modern Family. This is what family is now, and there are three families in it. There's the patriarch who is divorced and remarried to a very young Mexican. I think she's Hispanic, Colombian. There you go. There is a homosexual couple, two men who have adopted a child, and then there's the mom and dad, the more traditional one, but it's totally messed up. Modern family is that. You've got all of these different compositions. You can put it together any way that you want. And our culture says that. Hey, we can't be dogmatic about what a family is. Family could look like a lot of different things, and we have the ability as a culture to define it. Now, that may seem to make sense, but in a minute we're going to get into why that is a lie, why that is not true. And I'll give you a little preview. The reason that that's not true is because God created family. He made it already, and He didn't give us the ability to recreate it. When something is made, and it's already made, oftentimes the best we can do is break it. Well, that's not true. The best we can do is leave it alone, and if we try to change it, we end up breaking it. That's a better way to say it. I'm going to get into that in a minute, but I'm starting with the lies. Our culture tells us that we can define family as we see fit. I'm saying that's a lie. We'll get into why here in a minute. Here's a second lie. Second thing our culture tells us that I believe to be untrue, and that's this, that family roles are negotiable. First of all, family is negotiable. How you put it together, you can do anything you want. Secondly, that family roles are negotiable. Once you get your family together, however you create it, then everybody in there what they do, how they function inside the family is completely up to those people. So we have situations where, our culture tells us that ultimately there's really no difference between men and women. And if that's true, then really there is no difference or nothing distinct about a husband or a wife. A husband just happens to be a person in a marriage, and a wife happens to be another person in a marriage. What they do is completely up to them. How they function within that family is completely up to them. And it depends oftentimes, our culture tells us, it really has nothing to do with how you are or who you are. It has everything to do with what you want. How do you want to function within this? What is it that is going to give you the greatest satisfaction? So instead of going into it and saying, I have a role to play, our culture tells us, no, you go into it and say, what do I like? What makes me feel good? What can I get out of this? And we can define roles within marriage. Our culture tells us increasingly there is no difference between adults and children. In other words, if your child wants something, who are you as an adult to say no to that? If your child thinks that he or she, as a third grader, wants to change their gender, well, you as an adult cannot say anything to that because that's that child's choice to make. And so that third grader has complete autonomy over much of its life. And our culture wants to erase the distinctions even between adults and children, wants to erase the distinctions between men and women, husbands and wives. So not only is family negotiable, we can put it together any way we want, but then the roles within family are negotiable. Once you put your family together any way you want, then everybody chooses what they want to do inside of that thing called family. That's what our culture tells us. I believe that to be a lie. Because, we're going to get to it in a minute, God has defined the roles within marriage. God created marriage, and He defined the roles within marriage. Culture says no. Family is negotiable. Family roles are negotiable. And finally, something our culture tells us is that family really is optional. You can take it or leave it. In other words, there are different ways to get to the same result. Whatever benefit there might be in family, you can get that without family. Family is optional. Maybe you like family, maybe you want a family, but it doesn't matter because whatever that person might get out of marriage, you can get it a completely different way. Not marriage, out of family. Whatever benefits there are to family, you can get them a lot of different ways. We talked about this 2 weeks ago. You want sex? You don't need marriage for that. You don't need a family for that. Just go get it. You want kids? You don't need a family for that. Just go get kids. Either through medical procedures or adoption, whatever. You don't need a family for that. You want close personal relationships? You don't need a family for that. Go get them some other way. You want children to be raised up to be good citizens? You don't need a family for that. They just need a good education, or they need opportunities or something. Our culture tells us that family is optional. And you walk it right back up the line. Roles, husbands, wives, fathers, mothers, they're optional. Adults, they're optional. Kids, you don't have to be a kid. You can just kind of be born with complete autonomy. That's optional. In fact, this whole family thing, you can do with it what you want. It's not that important. And if you try to get too dogmatic about it, it just doesn't work. That's what our culture says. Our culture tells us those things. And that is a difficult thing to grasp. A difficult thing to wrestle with. And I acknowledge that as I talk about that, it might stir things inside of you. Because it sounds dogmatic, doesn't it? It sounds like, wow, well then who can who can get the benefit out of this? Well, we're going to go there. I think these are the lies that our culture tells us. So, what does God tell us instead? What are the truths that God gives us that help us to think correctly? Because again, guys, what this whole series is about is this, that our culture tells us things that are not true. And if they're not true, and if we believe them, we are going to make poor choices. If the culture tells us that family is optional, and that's not true, here's what's going to happen. If you believe that, you are going to make poor choices. And if family is indeed not optional, if you need it for something, but you think I can take it or leave it, you're going to make bad choices and you're going to miss. If you think family roles, that's negotiable. We can do whatever we want. If that's not true, if it's not true, but you think it is, well, you're going to struggle within the confines of family because you're not going to understand that you have a role and everybody else does. If you think that family is negotiable, we can make family anything we want, it doesn't make any difference. If that's not true, well, you're going to miss out. You're going to struggle to respond well. So, what are the truths God tells us? What are the protections God gives us? Number one, family is defined. And these are going to respond just to the lies that we just saw. Our culture tells us the family is negotiable. God says that family is defined. In other words, our culture says we can create family any way we want it. God says, no, I have created it. It is what it is because I made it. I want to read some verses. I'm back in Genesis here. Genesis 1. I'm going to start reading here in verse 27. This is after God created everything, and then He made humans at the very end. I'll start reading in verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, in our likeness. Let them rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created man in His own image. In the image of God He created him. Male and female He created them. God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and over every living creature that moves along the ground." And then Genesis 2:24, we read that just a little bit ago. "For this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and they will become one flesh." God, at the very beginning of creation, said, I'm going to make something. And the thing I'm going to make is called a family. And here's what it's going to be. I'm going to create a man, and I'm going to create a woman. And they're distinct. They both bear God's image, but one's a male, one's a female. I'm going to bring a male and a female together. The man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one. What's going to come out of that is I have things for them to do. One of the things I have for them to do is to fill the earth. I want them to have children. We're going to get into in a little bit how then those children are raised up within in the confines, in the greenhouse of that family. God created family. He said, this is what it is. This is what a family is. This is how it's put together. These are some of the things that it's going to do. I'm going to make it this way, and here's what I want to do with it. God did that. God the Creator did that. When you are the Creator, you have the right to make things as you see fit. God said, I'm going to make a family, and this is what it is. That's very simple, but it's profound. It's very simple, but it's profound, because if God created it that way, then it is not ours to try to recreate. It's like this. It's soup season. I love winter for many reasons. One of them is soup just tastes better in the winter. Hot, good soup is a wonderful thing. My mom was a good soup maker. But Mom would start, soup was a you didn't just do it in a half an hour. A chicken noodle soup like that, my mom would take a chicken She'd start with a chicken, and she would cook that chicken, and after we'd eaten much of the chicken, she'd take this, I don't know if this, what this is going to, this is just when Mom made chicken, she'd toss that carcass back in the pot and make a stock. She would boil that thing down, and she would simmer that chicken, and then she'd cut up pieces of chicken and put it in there. And then she would, cut up all the vegetables. My mom was big on vegetables. Carrots and rutabagas. People don't eat rutabagas anymore. I grew up eating rutabagas and chicken noodle soup and all of these vegetables that Mom would put in there, and she would season it. And then, after all that, she'd put it in that big pot, and it would just simmer for a long, long, long time. And it was filled with good flavors, the chicken and the vegetables, and Mom would put oregano or something in there, and it would just kind of simmer, and all those flavors would work together, and it was so good, and it was so good for you. Mom and Dad grew all the vegetables. I grew up eating the vegetables right out of our garden, and so if we're making a chicken noodle soup, it was the neighbor's chicken and our carrots in that pot. And it was wonderful, and my sweet, beautiful young wife has stepped into my mother's role as soup maker number one, and soup is a wonderful thing. I can't make soup. When I try to make soup, this is the best I can come up with. Chicken flavor. and the chicken flavor is just a suggestion, really. It doesn't taste like chicken at all. If you eat the beef one, it tastes pretty much the same. It's just a different color package. It's mostly just salt flavored. And it takes, 3 minutes? Depends on how willing you are to eat crunchy noodles, I guess. And so there's a right way to make soup. There are fast, quick, easy ways that aren't nearly as satisfying, aren't nearly as healthy, aren't nearly as good. Sometimes our culture tries to take something God created and just get a quick, fast substitute that isn't nearly as satisfying, isn't nearly as healthy, isn't nearly as good, like ramen noodles. But the problem with our culture is it doesn't always stop there. Sometimes we end up with this, and it's just the honest truth. Sometimes we try to take something God has created and we poison it. And if we eat it, we will become poisoned. And our lives aren't, it's not just that I'm missing the great benefits, I start to be harmed. It's not just that I miss the benefits of what God wanted me to have in this thing He created. If I mess with it too much, I can start to be harmed by it. That's a scary thing, but what did we start this series with? Our culture has been poisoned by sin. Our culture is filled with dangers. This is a dangerous place we live in, guys. And if our culture is telling us lies about all kinds of things, it's not just, I guess I got that wrong. It's this could be extremely dangerous for us. I think this whole family thing is part of that. God said, this is what a family is. God defined it. He has the right as the Creator to define it. He chose to define it. This is what goes into a family. A man will take his wife, they will become one, and they will raise children. That is how God defined a family. To try to alter that, it's not ours to try to alter it. The best we can do by altering it is coming up with something that isn't as good. The worst we can do is coming up with something that's harmful. God defined family. Family is defined. It's not negotiable. We don't create it. God did. That's the truth. Here's the second truth. Family roles are defined. Our culture says family roles are negotiable. Once you get into a family, however you build it, everybody can kind of do what they want. God says, no, that's not true. Because He created the family and He put the different components into it, then He defined the roles of those components. And God made the parts to fit. When God created Adam and Eve, he said he made them in his image, male and female, he created them. So God created distinctions between men and women. He brought a man and a woman together, and they are two of the big components that go into a marriage. The man and the woman are uniquely crafted by God. They have been made to be part of this thing. In other words, it's not just random things thrown in there, or let's just gather what we can and see what we got. No, I'm going to bring one of these and one of these. And this has certain strengths and weaknesses, and this has certain strengths and weaknesses, and they're going to work together. The roles within family, God defined them. Same with adults and children. God said children function in a certain way. That's the way he created us. God did not make us so that we're born fully functioning. He made us to need a whole lot of care and training and help and guidance. He made kids to have ideas and energy. He made parents to interact with them and siblings to interact with each other. He did this. This is how he created it. So within the confines of a family, all of us have certain roles. In Ephesians, this is a good passage. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but if you read through Ephesians chapter 5, end of chapter 5 into chapter 6, this is one of the succinct places where God describes these roles of a family. And he starts, right in chapter 5, verse 21. He's talking about wives, husbands, and children, all right there. Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Point by point. And God explains it here. He talks about it in 1 Peter 3, different places. God explains these different roles. He says, I created a family. This is what goes into it. And then once you're into it, everybody has roles, and here's what your roles are. And the husband's role falls into a certain set of parameters. The wife's role falls into a certain set of parameters. The children's role falls into a certain set of parameters. The husband and wife don't do exactly the same things. Certainly they overlap, they do them together, but there are distinct roles. The children and the parents don't do exactly the same things. The mom and the dad. All of these roles fit together. God designed them to fit into this thing called family. And the parts are not interchangeable, nor are they really exchangeable. In other words, it gets back to the creation of a family. You can't say, well, anybody could fill the wife role. Anyone can do that. Or maybe we don't need it at all, but if someone's good, anyone can do it. The kids or the husband, or it doesn't matter who does it. Just find someone who's willing to do it, and that's fine. It doesn't work that way. My wife, I'm going to have a grandson in April. I am excited. And so I bought him a gun, and my wife made him a teddy bear. That's how, in my family, that's how the roles go. This is just the mock-up of the teddy bear. This is not going to be the actual teddy bear. She's going to make the teddy bear out of a shirt of her dad's, which will be very fun. For my grandsons, we'll have a shirt made of, he'll have a teddy bear made of the shirt of his. You'll figure it out. Anyhow, this is just the mock-up of the bear. Now, I'm not a sewer, but I know that everything here has a specific role. All of these seams are stitched together with a sewing machine. This may seem stupid, but you can't use nails. You can't nail this together. Something needs to hold it together. Well, it's not, just whatever you can think of. Just hold it together with whatever you want. No, I can't use nails. That will not fill the role of holding this together. It just won't do it. It'll seem like it kind of maybe does, won't it? It'll seem like it kind of maybe will hold it together. See, the sewers are saying it won't even hold it together. I mean, I can nail that sucker together. Won't hold, and it's going to be pokey. So I can't do it. It's not like anything can fill that role. This is going to be stuffed with soft stuff. You can't just fill it with rocks. You could fill this with rocks. It would kind of fill it out, but it wouldn't hold its shape, and the little one couldn't hold it, and it would be painful. You can't just use anything to fill the role of stuffing it. It doesn't have his nose yet. I can't use an egg. Put an egg on there for a nose. It's just not going to work. You get the point? Certain things have to happen to make this teddy bear happen, to make him come to fruition, to make him do what he's supposed to do. But you can't just do anything you want. It's held together by thread, sewn together. It's stuffed with something soft and moldable and firm that'll help him hold his shape. I just can't exchange all of that stuff. It's the same in a family. You cannot just say, well, certain things need to happen, but anyone can do them. No, God crafted the parts. Part of him creating a family was he crafted the parts to work together, and he told each part what its role was. Husbands have a role. And in God's family, the husband is a man. Our culture says no. In fact, it could come to the point where I could be accused of hate speech. And in fact, I probably am. Because what I'm saying right now is that two men do not make a family. It makes something, but God said it is not a family. A man cannot fill the function of a wife. He cannot do it because he has not been created by God to do it. That's what I'm saying. Now, you may disagree with that. I understand. I think that's exactly what God is saying. And folks, what I'm saying is our culture has gotten it wrong. And you live in that culture. And you are asked to believe things that I believe God says are not true. The whole point of culture is it's poisoned, and so it lies to you. The protection against the lies of the culture is what are the truths that God is saying. Does that make sense? I think God lays out truths. This is what a family is. This is how the roles within a family function. The husband has a role. The wife has a role. They interact together. The parents have a role. The children have a role. They interact together. The mom and the dad interact, and they interact differently. We all fit together. It looks a little different for everybody. You know, when you make soup, you may like more rutabagas than me. So your soup might not have oregano. There's different ways, each soup is a little bit different, but the basic components are the same. That's what God says. Family is defined because God created it. Family roles are defined because God made the parts to fit. And finally, family is necessary. Our world says family is optional. God says, no, it isn't. Family is necessary because God uses it uniquely. God created family to accomplish very specific, very powerful things. God uses family uniquely, so it is not optional, it is necessary, and there are at least two very powerful reasons why family is necessary. One of them is that family gives us a picture of God's kingdom. It shows us a picture of how God interacts with us. Family is a picture of God's kingdom. Here at the end of Ephesians 5, where God is talking about the roles, here's a family, and here's what everybody does within the family. He makes an interesting statement. He goes back and he quotes Genesis 2:24 that we've gone to a couple times today. Man will leave his father and mother, be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This thing, this nucleus of a family. He quotes that, and then he says, this is a profound mystery, but I'm talking about Christ and the church. Somehow, God says, I want you to understand, ultimately, I want you to understand me, says God. I want each of you to know me and to have a relationship with me. That's the ultimate goal. That is best. There is nothing better than knowing and being close to God. That is better than being married. That is better than having kids. I believe that with all my heart. I believe with all my heart that no family, no matter how perfect your family is, it pales in comparison to you growing in a relationship with God, knowing Him and being known by Him. learning to let him speak to you, following him, falling deeply in love with him. There is nothing. Here's another, perhaps sounds like I don't know what this sounds like, but I believe that so much that, in fact, Jesus said things like this: who are my mother and brothers? I'll trade them for those who know and love God. Having a relationship with God is better than any spouse, better than any child, better than any grandson. I love my wife. I pray often, Lord, help me to love you more than I love my wife. I love my children. I pray, Lord, I desire you more than I desire them. I think I'm going to love my grandson. Sure feels like it. I'm going to start praying, Lord, help me to long for you more than I long for him. Because nothing's better. And it's a picture, but it's a picture. It's a picture. And God, because God wants us to come to him, he gives us pictures of what that looks like. Family is one of those pictures. I don't have these things, but just different passages. And the Bible is filled with images that God says, hey, you want to know what it's like to know me? Well, it's like a family. Like here in Isaiah 62:5 says, as a young man marries a maiden, so your maker will marry you. As a bridegroom rejoices over his bride, so will your God rejoice over you. I remember watching Sue walk up the aisle and I really did forget the rest of my wedding day because I saw her coming and she was going to be mine. So God says, yeah, you remember that, Rob? That's what I feel toward you. That is a picture of my relationship with you and that family thing. And I learned so much that in Proverbs 3 there it says, the Lord disciplines those he loves as a father, the son he delights in. When my first child was born, and I began to see my heart is just tied to this little girl. And I think about her, and I long for her, and I think about her future. God said, yes, Rob, that's how I think about you. It's a picture. Here's the problem. What is this a picture of? Tommy, can you go to that next slide? What is this a picture of? Can you tell? No, this is what a picture. This is what it is. Go back one more, Tom. You can't really tell what it is. It's the exact same picture, but it's been marred, it's been defaced, and so you can't really tell what it is. But this is what it really is. Listen, folks, you and I need help, and so God gives it to us. He has given us family to help us see what it's like to have a relationship with him. If we mar the picture of family, we will struggle to know who God is. We are not smart enough. We need the picture. We need the picture. Does that make sense? It's such a good thing. We need the picture. That's one of the reasons it's important. Here's a second reason I think family is necessary. It's because we thrive in family. God created us to thrive in family. I shared the verse earlier. It's not good for the man to be alone. I'll make a helper suitable for him. We thrive in the context of family. We were designed to thrive in the context of family. We all have a mother and a father. We enter this world with a mother and a father. And we were meant to thrive within that unit functioning. That's where God has spent so much time in the Bible talking about parents. Be wise with how you interact with your children. Why? Well, because then they're going to be healthy men and women. They're going to bring peace to you, God says. As healthy men and women are raised up to understand right and wrong, he says, then when the righteous thrive, the whole country does well. When the righteous come to power, there's peace and joy in the world. Family is the greenhouse for healthy men and women that make for a healthy society, I believe. We could explore that theme. I realize I'm just saying something there without digging into it a whole lot. I think that's what the Bible says. There is joy in that husband and a wife relationship, growing deeper in intimacy with each other. There is joy in siblings growing up together. There is joy. We thrive within that. We were meant to thrive. It's a greenhouse. Think of it as a greenhouse, with all the conditions to help that plant grow and blossom and bloom and produce fruit. We thrive within this thing called a family. Those are the truths. Now, here's the struggle with that. I'm going to get to the action steps. What do we do about it? How do we respond to that? As I share this, I have felt a pain in my heart for most of us, for myself, because none of us have had that. Not completely, not the way God intended. I had a mom and a dad who stayed together. I grew up in that traditional nuclear family, but it wasn't perfect. It was far from it. So much so that some of my siblings hate my father. I am messed up as much as anybody I know. Most of it my own fault. Some of it because of ways I interacted with my family. Many of us here have broken marriages, second marriages. Many of us here have children in different places. Many of us here have parents who were divorced. As I say this stuff, my heart breaks for myself and for all of us. It truly does. Because this, maybe more than most things, our culture, because it's so important, because it's so wonderful, our culture has done its best to ruin this, to ruin family. And for many of us, it perhaps feels like, at least to some degree, it's been ruined. It's at least not what it could be. I understand that. So part of me doesn't even want to say this stuff. The more I thought about this message, the more I thought, what's the point? Just telling everybody what we don't have. Looking through the window at what it could be, and I'm on the outside and I can't get it. But I don't believe that that's true. I do not believe that that's true, because here's what I believe about God. He understands that we live in this poisoned, dangerous, broken world. And God says, in the midst of that, I can take you from where you are, and I can get you to the place where you want to be. So here are the action steps, and we could spend weeks talking about these. I'm just going to name them and talk just very briefly about them. Number one, find God in your place. Find God where you are. Were your parents divorced? God understands that. Find God where you are. In the Bible, there's the story of Naomi. You familiar? If you want to read about Naomi, it's in the Book of Ruth. Very short little book. It's a story. And Naomi was a woman who had a husband and 2 sons. She found herself, her husband was dead, both of her sons were dead, and she was a widow with no money in a foreign land. And back then, there was no social security. She was bereft of her family. They were all gone. And she had no means of support. At the end of the book of Ruth, Naomi is praising God and saying, "You are better to me than 7 sons, God. You have filled my life with joy." God took a woman whose family was broken and filled her with joy because she just said, "Lord, I'm going to try to find you in my place." The Book of Esther, another book you want to read in the Old Testament. Young girl, a Jew, taken from her homeland, taken to a foreign country. Her parents are dead. She's being raised by her uncle. The king of this foreign country decides he wants a big harem, so he goes and finds all the pretty girls, brings them into his harem, systematically sleeps with them one after the next. Esther is part of that. She cannot now go find a husband somewhere because she is part of the king's harem. Her family is dead, and her future family has been taken from her. She looks for God. And in the end, she is filled with joy. God is better than this broken world. God is stronger and better than your family. You see, God created family, but He is still the king over it. God created family to bless you, but ultimately blessing comes from Him, not your family. God created family to help you thrive, but He is the master gardener, not your family. Find God where you are. He can take you exactly where you are. Single, divorced, remarried, alone, in a struggling family, in a perfect family. The person in the perfect family needs God just as much. Find God in the place where you are, because He is better to you than 7 sons or a husband or a wife or parents. He's better. Number 2, strengthen your family. What family do you have? Strengthen it. Lord, how do you want me to make this, whatever it is, this is where I am. However I got here, this is where I am. How do you want me to go forward? God is so good. Our life and our relationship with God is seldom, maybe never, about our failures. It's about our response going forward. We are going to fail. I have failed immensely. You have. Our relationship with God and the goodness of God is not dependent on our failures. David failed in family spectacularly. His sons killed each other. A lot. He had women from all over the place. This man failed spectacularly. And yet each time, when God confronted him, he said, "You're right, God. Where do I go from here?" And God blessed him. And David strengthened what he had. Strengthen what you have. Whatever family situation you're in, say, "Lord, how do you want me to make this good? Where do you want me to go from here?" Because God has a place for you to go from wherever you're at. And finally, the third thing is understand and love your role. Are you a wife? All right, Lord, what does that mean for me? Help me to know what it is and help me to love it. Are you a husband? All right, Lord, what does that mean for me? Help me to know what that is and help me to love it. Why do you want to love it? Because you are specifically designed to fill that role, I believe. The world tells us, no, if you do that, you're not going to like that. There's nothing better. You are God's masterpiece, created in Christ Jesus to do good works. If you're a husband or a wife or a parent or a child or a son or a daughter, well, part of those good works is that. And you are specifically designed to do it. Say to the Lord, help me to know I'm a husband and a father and I'm soon to be a grandfather. Okay, Lord, help me to know what that means and help me to love it. Help me to love that. Because I believe you more than I believe my own heart. I believe you more than I believe what I might see in Modern Family or on TV or something. Ask God to help you know and understand your role. Just 2 quick things. If you're married, this is a great book called Love and Respect by a man named Emerson Eggerichs, which is just a cool name. Just a really, really good book for husbands and wives. This is a book called Premeditated Parenting. Just really good if you're parents. There are so many resources out there. God can help you to find them. But know your role and love it. I'm going to pray. We'll be done today. Lord, I pray that you would help each of us, Lord, to wrestle with this. Because this hits so close to home for all of us. This hits so close to home for all of us because every one of us started in a family and it had such an impact on us. Every one of us somehow interacts in this thing called family, and it is so powerful and it is so wonderful, and it hits close to home. Thank you that you know that, you understand that. Jesus, you lived in a family here. You came here and you had a mother and a father and brothers and sisters. You understand family. And so you can help us to understand it and to live well in it. And Lord, I don't know every story here. Thank you that you do. And we ask you, God, to help us. Help us to believe what you say about family, to believe what you ask us to do in family, and then to move forward. And it is messy, and it is difficult, and it is hard. But anything that's good in this world is. So help us. We need help. Help us to believe you, help us to understand you, and help us to know what to do, Lord, as we move forward. We ask you to do this in Jesus' name. Amen. We're going to take a 3-minute break. If you have kids in Sunday school, run get them. We're going to come back in 3 minutes, and we're going to sing a couple of songs.